Hello there, this is Mike Knezovich, and welcome to the latest edition of Tune Up with Mike and Monty, Brain Science Step by Step. We're here in Chicago on a beautiful summer day, and I'm with Dr. Monty Pavuluri, as I always am. How are you today, Doctor?
I'm doing great, Mike, and hello to everyone and good morning, or whatever time it is.
Morning for us. Each episode we talk about how our brains function and what can go wrong and why, and maybe what we can do to address those things. Today we're talking about something that we're all concerned about, we experience, and we talk a lot about, and that is emotion. And we're going to talk about the complicated process that is how our brains process emotion. And I think it might pay to start with, just kind of a layperson's definition of what do you mean by process emotion in the brain?
Mike, emotions, like any other feelings or emotions, in other words, are experienced by us, and they're brain-based processes, and these emotions are received, they're captured, they're understood, stored, and influence our thinking, feeling, and behavior from the point of initial exposure to emotional stimuli. And it is a complicated process, but it's intuitively well understood, just the way we understand and experience them.
So when you talk about recognition, does that mean emotional recognition? That means I go, I'm scared, or oh, I'm mad, or
Right. Emotion recognition is recognizing other people's emotions, as well as emotions in the faces of other people,
I see.
as well as the emotions that you're experiencing. But mainly in social situations and interacting with people, it is a focus of how to understand emotions and what you encounter in front of you.
Okay. So it's kind of, it's my ability to interpret the emotions you're experiencing and then how I process it myself.
Exactly.
Okay.
And also, it is fear, anger, sadness, um, ambiguity. These are all various scenarios, for example, that you should be able to recognize when you see them in various intensities.
Okay.
Um,
Um, so I have a question. When I think about memories, often they're really intertwined with some emotion that I felt like a pain or happiness.
right.
How does that stick? I mean,
Right. So emotions, when they're experienced, are transmitted to the brain, obviously, and we call them in our neuroscientific language emotional memories.
mhm.
Any memories that are intertwined with significant emotions are captured, especially amygdala, which is the hub of emotional system, captures that uh, primordial emotion and transmits it to a part called hippocampus, which is the hub for memory, and stores it there.
Okay.
And then the connections between amygdala and hippocampus are primarily involved in maintaining this emotional memory. And they're drawn every time you remember them, and they seem to be more significantly and strongly remembered if they're negative emotions than even positive
I
emotions.
think we all understand that.
Right. I mean, you remember when your mom yelled at you more often than when your mom really hugged you and kissed you, because we kind of are very protective of ourselves from any negativity that would attack us as a way of self-protection. And I think that this emotional memory is captured in the same way as in, they stay and stick longer. That's why we better be nice to each other more than being angry, right?
Yeah, there's many reasons to do that. It's funny
Yeah.
because you're explaining sort of like this phenomenon with sports fans, that because the kind of old saw is sports fans will always remember the really brutal loss that their team
Right.
suffered some
Right.
time ago more than they will when they won.
That's right. I mean, the post-traumatic stress disorder or the traumas that we experience in life are more strong, and you cannot get rid of them or wiggle out of these traumatic events that occur in our life because of the intensity of those emotional memories that are trapped in our brain.
Um, it's it's pretty cool to think that, when you think about a computer, you don't think a computer could store an emotion, but a brain can, for better or worse.
Exactly. So you can make, an Alexa think, but I don't know if Alexa can feel.
Not yet, anyway. Um,
Right.
all right, so I you know, s we tend to lump emotions as negative or positive, but it's a little more complicated than that.
Right.
But I mean, we know negative. That can be what, anger.
Fear and anything that's causing negative experiences or feelings that sit with you. And then the positive ones are feeling happy and safe. But then there are other dimensions of emotions, such as arousal. That is both positive and negative emotional states, create levels of a quiet, happy, content attitude versus restlessness, agitation, and aggravation. And you feel a visceral emotional reactivity to emotions. And that's the level of arousal. And that dimension of arousal kind of correlates with the intensity of emotions one feels. And Mike, sometimes people are so intense or in your face, and they kind of like get too excited for negative or positive things.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are experiencing and demonstrating that arousal in them.
I see.
Right.
So it's sort of, whether it's good or bad, this is the force behind it. It's
Force
propelling
behind
it.
it's a physical bodily reactivity or experiential feeling of arousal that is experienced. And another dimension is also adaptive and maladaptive. Say, for example, you are anxious. I mean, it's highly adaptive, as you know, in minor situations where you're supposed to get ready for a certain task.
In other words, there's a level of anxiety that's healthy.
Very, very healthy.
Yeah.
But then there is the highly disabling pathological conditions where you are paralyzed by anxiety when the emotions hit you, and they're very strong and disabling. So they affect your thinking, emotions, and also physiology or bodily arousal.
I mean, it's bad for you to be in that state of anxiety.
Absolutely.
Yes.
There is high cortisol, and you get stressed out, and you become dysfunctional. Therefore, moderating that pathological anxiety as well as arousal and processing the negative emotions is essentially a good thing to do when you are experiencing. So it's all about how you process, understand, and synthesize the emotions you feel that help you direct well in life. See, some people get stuck with negativity happening to them, and they sob, cry, and they kind of carry that negative, dark mood with them, and the whole family is impacted by it. Whereas some people can use logic around emotions, see them for what they are, try and find logical understanding, talk about it, process it, and deal with it, and move on. So there is a level of processing of these emotions that vary from person to person, and thinking and feelings obviously are highly intricately connected that direct the emotional processing ability.
One thing before we move on, that this anxiety versus anxiety disorder, I think this concept that anxiety is a positive adaptive kind of ability you have, like getting nervous before something, or making sure making sure you're on time, and so you get a little anxious, but it's when it keeps you, when you're so scared that you don't act at all, right? Because you're afraid of failing or whatever.
Right.
That's when you go, okay, well, we need to do something about this.
Right. I mean, it's almost like your old emotional memories can kick in and say, oh my God, you might fail again like last time.
Yeah.
And because especially if they didn't process that emotion, plus if your amygdala is overactive and reacts to the negative emotions that you feel in an excessive manner with high bodily arousal, with insula being overactive, and making you remember and think about, all the negative things.
And then you just get stuck there.
And you get stuck, yeah.
All right, so this is all good. All right. So what, to the extent that you can explain it to someone like me, what's going on in the brain sort of from a biological point of view? Like, let's say, all right, so I look at you and you smile at me or you grimace.
Beautiful. So when I see that's a great question, Mike. I mean, when you look at me, then immediately what happens is what I see is represented in my brain. Interestingly, when I look at you, the shape, the color are registered first at the back of the brain called occipital cortex. The part of the brain that looks the shapes and colors is all the way at the back of the brain.
Really?
Called occipital cortex. So when the eyes are at the front, but when you see with the eyes, the stimuli immediately go to the back of the brain. And then they go to the fusiform gyrus. The
Easy for you to say.
Yeah. Fusiform gyrus is a next stop towards the front. And that's just like inside of your ear on the brain, on the in the middle at the back.
Mm-hmm.
And that fusiform gyrus is what helps you to recognize that it's always Mike smiling. So I recognize you as Mike.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens. Then that information is transmitted to superior temporal gyrus, which is also a little bit to the front where your temple is, but all the way to the inside
so
of
it's
the brain.
gradually making its way to the front.
Made to the front, yeah. That superior temporal gyrus extracts the understanding of emotion called smile on Mike's face. Okay?
Yeah.
So I know you're smiling. Okay? And then that is transmitted next to amygdala, when amygdala, which is the hub of emotion, makes you feel joy and happiness and positive feeling, experiencing your smile, and say, oh, Mike is smiling. So I react to that smile with my amygdala, and then I transmit it again all the way to the front to my CEO of the brain. And that tells you what is going on, like meaning of it and why you're smiling. You just got into the this to record this podcast and you're smiling. I understand you, the context and everything, and that is decoded by the brain, and then it goes back to amygdala and helps you to react or not react more and things like that. The loop is closed.
And this all happens in a split second.
In split second,
It's
And
incredible.
what is fascinating is there is a modern findings that came up, or like the most latest findings that came up, that actually say that the speed of how this is processed is in split seconds all the way to the cortex. In the olden days, people used to think that, old days means as old as even 5 years ago, when people used to think that the emotions sometimes just go to the amygdala in split seconds and then you react. But really now we know that it just goes all the way to the cortex, and cortex is involved even in synthesizing immediate emotions.
So this amygdala thing.
So that's a phase response circuit, by the way.
Yeah.
This is called phase response circuit, all the way from eyes to occipital cortex through fusiform gyrus, superior temporal gyrus, and amygdala and the cortex and back.
But that's a great explanation of something simple that we take for granted, that we do all the time, and all the stuff that's going on.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you brought up the amygdala, and the amygdala comes up again and again. It seems to be sort of, well, you call it the hub but it does seem to be involved with everything, one way or another.
Exactly. I mean, amygdala is fascinating. I mean, it's involved mainly with emotions. It's a hub of all the emotions that are received, processed, and sorted out immediately before it goes to every other place in the brain. So it's imagine that this is little organ amygdala, the size of an almond, is just so powerful, and it has like billions of connections in the brain. The connection aside, there are nuclei within the amygdala. They are little parts. Nuclei means little parts in the amygdala that are specialized to do certain things, right? So imagine when you are eating an orange, there are little sections within the orange, right? I mean, in the same way, amygdala has basal nucleus, basal accessory nucleus, then there's lateral nucleus, and then the central nucleus towards the medial side. So there are so many little parts within amygdala, and the lateral or basolateral part of it, or the side outer part of it, receives all the sensory input, and the central part or the inner side of the amygdala gives out all the outputs. So just like electrical circuits,
that's the response.
there is a coming in and going out. And there is another way to think about it too, and it's recorded in animals and human studies as well, that all the listening aspects of emotions are felt or processed through central nuclei, and all the visual stuff is processed through the lateral side. So, I mean, there are many ways to cut the same thing, and it's complex, and it's all understood one bit at a time, and we're trying to put it together like a Rubik's Cube, And also, there, in the Thai laboratory of Thai at MIT, they just recently published about how to separate reward systems from emotions, and they actually injected some dye in mice and saw the neurons that are connected to amygdala as well as the basal ganglia. And then the negative emotions, when the mice feel the negative emotions, they quickly hit the amygdala. Whereas when there is something really exciting, that's sugar, liquid, or something that the mice is going to experience, then they hit to the reward circuit, goes into basal ganglia. So even how they are parsed out or figured out by the brain. So amygdala is fascinating in that sense. It's a primordial source of processing emotions, especially the negative emotions.
And you said it's the size of an almond?
Almond, yeah. I remember once, I was in Greece and giving a talk in Athens, and I said amygdala, the size of almond. Then somebody shouted in the audience that amygdala is an almond in Greek language.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. That's, yeah.
So you got to go to Athens to learn that.
All right. So when you're talking about these different nuclei, these cells, are some of them they're like purposeful? Or some of them related to certain
aspects of the
feelings,
function, yeah.
And others are the others. So,
yeah.
and these things are located in different places in the almond.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's hard to actually image them unless you have very, very special techniques that are yet to be developing properly. It's hard to see how the amygdala functions in neuroimaging.
All right, so we've
possible. Yeah.
We've talked a lot about how emotions get processed, and negative emotions and positive emotions, and then you're talking about how much we've learned even in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I guess this is a good time to talk about what we might talk about next in the next installment, because one of the things that we seem to be learning is how we have some control over this. If not control, some influence over how we experience emotions and in particular mindfulness and things like that. And I know that's a topic in and of itself, but I think it probably is the natural follow-up to this.
Sure. I think that we express and have a good cry, and we have catharsis with words and bring organization to fragmented time and content of the past. and explore deeper roots and styles of processing. Which is when, as you process, the intensity fades, and we are better able to function with these emotions and control them. But the meaningful, stability that we can develop with moderating these emotions and regulating them on a regular basis would require a lot of practice, such as mindfulness and meditations and so on.
Okay.
And so how the brain processes these emotions is what we could talk about. And it's very fascinating to understand what goes on in brain when you actually start to moderate our brain in managing these emotions.
Well, I'm excited to learn about that because I think, we've all heard a ton about mindfulness of late, and it can feel like a sort of I don't know, a new age, slippery kind of thing, but it's a real thing. And next time we talk on Tune Up with Mike and Monty, we'll get into mindfulness and how it really is a thing and how we can practice it.
Absolutely, that would be fascinating. It opens up a whole new box of thinking for us to kind of think of promising ways to, sort of have a great life and understand our own brain and our own mechanics of our own functioning, which so far have been trapped in this skull box where people didn't know what's going on in the brain, and now we can actually talk about it like it's an organ, like pancreas or liver or heart. We can talk about it.
No, it's fantastic. All right, so next time, let's talk about mindfulness and meditation and all that good stuff. In the meantime, I'll see you.
And have a great summer and fall or whenever you happen to listen to it. And thank you for your, for listening to us.
Thanks for listening. See ya.